got Elaiza with us. Elaiza is a celebrity when it comes to the
This is a celebrity. Not a celebrity, Rob. Normal person.
Yes, one of the top presenters on YouTube that talk about the Power Platform. You're definitely in the top 5, I would say. And your channel is called What the Flow, is that correct?
Oh no, it's a series. So I have a YouTube series called WTF What the Flow. So that started out with me showing how you can create cloud flows based on your experience and knowledge of the classic workflows in Dynamics. Because I started my journey with classic workflows, and then when I made the leap to cloud flows, there was a lot of hair pulling because it was somewhat different to classic workflows. You know, classic workflows is you literally click and select, but with cloud flows, you need to know things like the functions and what all of the other input value fields mean in each action or trigger. So through that learning process, I was like, okay, I think I need to help the world. So that's how I started my WTF series, and then it evolved from there.
Absolutely. And it's good that you mentioned it's just a series, because a lot of us get typecast like, oh, she's the flow girl, or like Nick Dolman is the Power Pages. And then when I talk to him, he's like, you do know I know things other than Power Pages. And this is a very good example where Elaiza is going to talk today about the Power Apps cards, which are a relatively new concept, and they have a lot of usages. So I'm not going to steal your thunder, but over to you, Elaiza. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rami, and for everyone who's joining us online today. So as Rami mentioned, I'm going to be talking about Power Apps cards. Now, Power Apps cards came into preview last year at around, I think, the end of October or November. Oh, wow. So it's a year since it came out in preview, because now at the beginning of this month, it's now GA, it's general availability. So that's what I'll be covering today. And I'm going to show you how you can use it as an alternative message for your Dataverse notifications by sending a card to Microsoft Teams using a channel. I apologize in advance. I have a cold, so I'm a bit congested, but hopefully everyone can hear me and understand what I'm saying. So fun fact, as well, join the conversation today on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, now X, and on LinkedIn. If you want to tag me, I'm totally cool with that. So fun fact, if you go to the Power Automate site, if you scroll all the way down, I'm there, that's me. So about me, obviously, I'm here in Wellington. I started with a Microsoft partner called Indigen, who is now known as Capgemini. I started with Dynamics CRM4, and in 2018 was when I dived into the Power Platform. Another fun fact, it was in that year where Rami and the rest of the NZ community invited me to come over and present for, I think it was the first New Zealand Dynamics 365 Saturday event, and that was at the James Cook Hotel. And it was in that event that prompted me to go, okay, I need to try and convert my classic workflows into cloud flows, and that was the starting point for me into understanding and learning how to do automation in cloud flows with Dynamics 365. And as I mentioned earlier, that led me to create my WTF YouTube series, where I would then educate other people how you can make the transition from classic workflows to cloud flows. I'm now a mom to a 1-year-old. Very time consuming when I'm not working, and I love food. And I've also been an MVP for the last 6 years. So in terms of the agenda, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Adaptive Cards, which is the predecessor to Power Apps cards. I'm going to explain why you would want to use Power Apps cards, why the product team came out with it. Then I'm going to do a live demo. I do have a backup in case things don't work out during the live demo. And then I'm going to share some additional details that the team released as part of Power Apps cards going GA earlier this month. So I'm borrowed slides from this presentation by Matt McLaurin, who's one of the principal program managers in the Power Apps team. So he was involved with Power Apps cards. I think he has since moved on, but in this Power Platform community call, this was last year in November, he does a brief demo and explanation of the history of adaptive cards and why perhaps cards, which I'm about to go through. So the slides that you're going to see are borrowed from that presentation. These are not my slides. I just want to call that out. So hands up if you have used adaptive cards before. Cool. So in terms of adaptive cards, what is it? It's literally its meaning. It will take the user interface of the application, the platform, or the framework that it's being sent to. So I've got in the next slide a screenshot that shows how adaptive cards adapts to the particular framework, application, or platform. And so it's authored in JSON, and it's also what they call lightweight. It doesn't consume a lot of size.
Just as a quick, I don't really know the system, but is saying the GSD statement the line 28?
Cool. Yeah, so it's authored in JSON and then it adapts to the native UI of the application, the platform, or the framework. So I've got some notes here. So Adaptive Cards was originally built by Tom Laird, who is a principal engineer at Microsoft. So he's the inventor of Bot Framework, and along with Matt Heidinger and David Clow. So those were pretty much the engineers that have worked on adaptive cards. Now, what happens internally at Microsoft when you want to try to get funding and get something shipped out and supported by Microsoft is they look at numbers using their telemetry inside knowledge. And this number here on the bottom left of the screen showed the usage of adaptive cards in 1 month, just in Outlook alone. It was over a billion adaptive cards that existed. I can't remember exactly when the snapshot was taken, but it made the team realize, okay, there's something cool and big here with adaptive cards. You know, what else can we do with it? So in terms of adaptive cards today, on the left of the screen is the adaptive cards designer. When you want to build your adaptive cards, as I mentioned, it's authored in JSON. So you can either, if you do know JSON, you can create it, manually using the properties, and objects, or there's also the option over here on the left-hand side where you can select the different components of the adaptive card, and through a user-friendly interface, as you can see, you can update the content accordingly. And then when it's sent to the specific application, framework, or platform, over on the right, you've got a snippet of what it would look like in, let's say, Outlook or Teams. So that's just as a snapshot what adaptive cards does. Here's some other screenshots of how it looks like in the different apps, platforms, and frameworks. So then the problem with adaptive cards, for those of you who have used it, as I mentioned, it's authored in JSON. And then when you want to use it in something like Cloud Flows, you have to copy and paste. And then when you do your iterative testing and you have to make modifications to your adaptive card, if you don't have that original source code of your JSON, it's kind of hard to edit and modify it. There's also no error handling logic. So again, you have to do the actual end-to-end process to see if the card will actually work. And then another big thing is the one at the bottom in terms of application lifecycle management for cards. It doesn't really exist. So in terms of what you see here was kind of a way of the team thinking, okay, what can we do to make this experience better, as well as try go with our values of trying to democratize development for any type of level of maker or pro dev. So then that's when they're like, okay, how about we do something cool? And that's where Perhaps Cards comes into the picture. So in terms of what it looks like with adaptive cards is over on the left, on the client side. So in other words, using your browser, you can go ahead and build your adaptive card using the adaptive card designer. And then when you want to push it out to somewhere else like the Azure bot framework or, a custom endpoint, you're relying on a pro dev to do that. Whereas now with Perhaps Cards, where it is right now. It's basically allowing you to use something that's familiar to you. If you have used Power Apps before, if you've created Canvas apps in the Power Apps Designer Studio, creating Power Apps cards should be a breeze. And in terms of the logic, the card data is now stored in Dataverse. So you don't need to have local logic or local rules in your adaptive card. You can just do it within Power Apps cards. So the main one that I want to point you to is the one in the middle. As I mentioned, if you didn't know JSON or if you found the adaptive card designer a bit overwhelming, when I show you how to design your card in the Power Apps Cards Designer Studio, you'll be like, okay, this looks familiar to me. I can just select, like a label control the same way that I do with Canvas apps, and I can also use Power Effects. So it's designed for any type of skill level, and that's what you'll learn today. So as I mentioned, it came out in preview and last year, and then earlier this year, they supported the ability to send adaptive cards using Cloud Flows and Power Automate, whereas originally when it came out in preview last year, you could only do it through Microsoft Teams by copying and pasting a link. So I'm going to show you how to do it through a flow in Power Automate. So who's it for? It's for anyone. If you are, I don't know, let's say someone in payroll and you want to send an alert whenever, let's say, a vendor invoice has come through, you can create a Power Apps card. If you have your data in Dataverse, because it has a connector in Dataverse, you can get the data out. So it's really for anyone. So in terms of the use case, I'm using the Innovation Challenge Model Driven app that comes pre-installed when you sign up for a trial, or you can install the sample apps in your developer environment. So that's what I've done. So as a use case that I'm going to show you today, whenever a challenge is created in the Innovation Challenge Model Driven app, I'm going to send a notification to a channel in Teams so that I'm aware that a new challenge has been added to the list and we're prompted to review it. So in terms of the solution, we are going to call a table through Cloudflow, but we are also going to be referencing environment variables, and I'll explain why later. And then we're going to use Power Apps cards to design our notification. And then we're going to use Cloudflows to do the automation of extracting the data, creating the card, and then sending it to a channel in Microsoft Teams. So without further ado, let's dive straight into it. So I'm going to exit out of my PowerPoint. I'll put my clicker right here. And I'll head over to my browser where I've got my environment open. So one of the things that came out as part of GA earlier this month is you can now create a card from within your solution, whereas previously you had to do it in the Power Apps Maker portal. So now if I go new, we'll see an option in here called Card. And this will prompt you to enter a card name. So I'll just say send card to Teams channel when a challenge is created. I can also give it a description. Now, best practice, you would obviously have a more descriptive text here, but for this demo, I'm just going to keep it simple. And so now it's going to load up the Power Apps card designer. And once it loads, this should look familiar if you have built Canvas apps before. So this no longer looks like the adaptive card designer site. It's all user friendly. So in terms of the different components in the Power Apps cards designer, you have the different controls that exist under display, input, and layout. Now, keep in mind that not all of the controls that you're used to seeing in Canvas apps are available in Power Apps cards. You also have the tree view where you can see all of the controls that are added on your card. We then have the data, so being able to add a data source. And then the last one is environment variables. So before I create the card, I just want to show you what we're aiming to do. So we want the card to look like this. So we're going to have a reference to the name of the challenge, the description of the challenge, who the owner is of the challenge, and to make it a nice end user experience for the team that is receiving this card in the channel. You don't want to just send, here's the details of the challenge. You want to be able to direct the users to be able to, see that challenge row in your model-driven app. So we're going to add a button, and that button is going to allow the user to click on it, and then it's going to automatically open up the challenge in the model-driven app in a browser tab. And then same with the second challenge, if the end user wants to see all of the active challenges rather than the new challenge that was just created, they can also click on that second button. It just makes it a nice overall end user experience. So that's what I'll be showing you. So the first thing that you want to do is add your data source. Now, as of today, right now, the only connector that is supported is Dataverse. The product team do have plans on lighting up other connectors, but on day one, Dataverse is a connector that's available. And by default, it'll use your credentials of your sign-in user to connect to the Dataverse connector. So now click OK. I'll then be prompted to choose a table. So again, this is the exact same experience that you're used to if you've created Canvas apps before. And because I am inserting 2 buttons, that's going to allow the end user to load that challenge in the model-driven app. I'm going to call my environment variables that will have little snippets of the data to build that URL. So I'll show you what that looks like very shortly. So I've selected environment variable definition table. So then the other one that I want is the environment variable values table from Dataverse. Cool. So we've now added our tables. The next thing what we want to do is use variables. So why are we using variables? Once again, I'll head over to my slides to help explain this. So in terms of the Cloudflow, I'll go to this slide. Over on the left-hand side is the action from the cards for Power Apps connector. And in order for us to display the data from the challenge table, we need to create what we call variables. And these variables will be populated using the dynamic content picker in Cloudflow. So basically, when I show you how we can build a Cloudflow, we're going to pull through the data from the challenge table as well as the user table to get the details. So in terms of the variables, this is just something I came up with, but to help explain variables. So we have what we call visible variables. These are variables that the end user will see that's being populated by the Cloudflow. And then we have an invisible variable that will be used by the button. So the user is not necessarily going to see it, but it's still going to be used as part of the PowerFX expression that will build the URL so that the end user can click on that button and it'll take them straight to that challenge record in the model-driven app. So that's why we're using environment variables, and using Cloudflows, you can populate those environment variables with data from your Dataverse tables. So I'm going to go back into the Power Apps cards designer. I'm going to create first variable. So we'll call this challenge. Whoops. Sorry, if the mouse cursor is dropping, it's because the stadium, the podium, it's on an angle. So apologies for those tuning in from online. It's a bit distraction, if it's a bit distracting. So I'll give it a name, and then you can select the type of variable you want it to be. For the demo today, I'm going to keep it simple and select text for all the variables. Now, in terms of the persistence, this basically means if you want the value of the variable to be reset every time an end user clicks on the card, you would select this option. If you don't want it to be reset, then you would select permanent. For this use case, I'm going to select permanent. Then we have customization. So when sending this card, this value can be customized. So in other words, we do want this to be customized because the Cloudflow is going to be inserting the data. And then in terms of customization is required, it simply means that this variable is mandatory and it is required to be populated, which is what we want. So I'll take that. And then in terms of the additional variable information, allow value to be returned to flow or box. So if you're designing a pair-ups card and it's what we call unidirectional, where the pairs card is expecting, data back from the end user, then you would tick this checkbox. But in my case, we're not asking the user to type anything, and the Cloudflow is not going to send that data anywhere that the end user has typed. So I'm just going to leave this unchecked. And then in terms of the title and description, this is what you will see in the card when you're building your Cloudflow, and you'll see that shortly. So I'll go ahead and give it a name, and then I'll give it a description. Dataverse. And that's your variable created. So I'm going to quickly create the other ones. So the first one was the challenge name. Then we had the challenge description. Do this real quick. Third one is the challenge owner. So those are my 3 visible variables. So as a reminder, this is the data that the end user is going to see. And then for my last variable, it's the invisible variable that's going to be used by the button. Okay, so that's all the variables created. So now we can go ahead and actually design our card. So by default, there will be 2 controls added. So we can go ahead and modify them. So I can change this to new challenge created. And for a bit of fun, I can also insert emoji. So let's do light bulb. And there we go. I can also change the look and feel. So I might make this a bit bigger, and I'll go ahead and update the label as well. All right, let me just save that. It's disabled. Oh, sorry, I needed to scroll up. Whoops, rookie mistake. I'll pull this title. And then for the next one, this is where I'll make a reference to the challenge name. By the way, I'm using the naming convention as suggested by another friend at Microsoft MVP, Matt Devaney. I can share links afterwards in the chat if anyone's interested. So for this one, we're going to call this label name. And I'm going to make this bold, and I'll also select the divider so we can give it a bit of a look and feel. Okay, so now what I can do is add more controls. So again, I'm going to do the text label. Now this time I'm going to reference the variable that we created. So to do that, you simply type in the name of your variable. As you can see, there's a bit of IntelliSense in here, so I can select the bar challenge name. And so what will happen in the Cloudflow is that when I see the action, I will see that the variable needs to be populated. And yeah, we'll go through that. real soon. Oops. Just leave this as normal and spacing. There we go. So before I continue, this is a format that I'm going to use. This is pretty much similar to, I think it's called FACS or FACSET in adaptive cards. So basically, I'm going to have one text label that acts as a key, and then another text label, which will be the variable that acts as the value. So it's kind of like key value pairs. So that's what we're going to continue for the remaining variables. So we're going to go ahead and do, is it the challenge description? Variable. Spacing again to none. And we'll insert several more. So this one is the bonus. And the final thing that I'll do is add those two buttons as mentioned. So I've got the first button, and I'll rename this to challenge. The button title, call it the challenge. So for those of you who are familiar with the functions in Canvas apps, when you want to open a URL, normally the function that you use is launch. Now, if I try use it, you'll see a red squiggly line, and that's because it's telling you that launch is currently not a supported function in Parrots cards. So in terms of the expressions that are supported today, there is a Microsoft Learn doc that lists the functions that are supported. So then the question is, okay, well, if we can't use a launch function, what can we use instead? So I'm going to head back to Parrots cards. Now, the other option that you could use is type open URL, which I'll select. And the key thing to remember with this type is that your URL that you enter in here needs to start with HTTPS. Otherwise, it's going to fall over when the user tries to click on the button. So keep that in mind. So if I was, let's say, a beginner, I would probably explicitly go into my model-driven app and copy and paste the details. However, now that Power Apps Cards is supported by solutions, you want to make sure that each time the Power Apps card is deployed to a target environment, the URL is going to work, and it's going to work in relation to that target environment's org URL, as well as the app name, as well as table name. All that needs to change dynamically each time you do your deployment. So the technique that I'm going to show you today is using environment variables. So I have a solution where that contains my variables. Got 4 variables in here, and I'll head back to my slides so I can help explain the URL construct. So in terms of the environment variables and how we're going to build the dynamic URL using environment variables, we've got one environment variable that is going to store the organization URI, and then we've got another variable that will have the app name value, and then there's also the page type. So the page type can either be entity record or entity list. Because we're directing the user to view that challenge, in the model-driven app, the page type needs to be entity record. And then we also have to provide a reference to the logical name of the table. So sample underscore challenge is a logical name of the challenge Dataverse table. And then we also need to provide a GUID for that row. So when we go back to the parents card, start using ParaFX. So I'm going to use the technique of string interpolation rather than concat. Hands up if anyone knows about string interpolation. So it's just another way of combining your strings together rather than using the concat function. So to start off, you use the $, and then you use a double quote, and then to delineate the expression that you're calling, in other words, the lookup function, you need to use a curly brace. So now I can enter in lookup, and here is where I can start referencing my environment variables. So the first one is values, and then the next one and we want the schema name of the environment variable. And to do that, I've got my notes here that have the name. The first half of the expression. Now I haven't finished the expression, but if I put the double quote, the red squiggly line should go away. So that will give me the first part of the expression. Now, the reason why you're seeing that yellow squiggly line is because it's just warning you of delegation. But so delegation is when your function is retrieving data from a data source, and if it exceeds a certain limit, it's not going to work for a function, or the performance won't be as good. However, because I'm only pulling one value from the environment variable definition table, this is totally fine. So you can safely ignore the yellow squiggly lines. One thing I do want to call out, again, if you have used Canvas apps before, when you enter in your expression, usually what will happen in Canvas apps and the Power Apps Designer Studio is that you see that value being retrieved live. And so you get that immediate feedback if your function is correct or not in your expression. But in Pav's cards, at the moment, you don't get that. So my tip for you guys is to have your expression in a Canvas app. So let me just zoom in. See how if I click on this control, if I just collapse that and expand the formula bar, this is exactly what I would be entering in the parents card. But in terms of the value that you see in Canvas apps, you get that immediate response and feedback, so you know whether you're doing it right or not. So for example, just to illustrate, by see that it's working straight away. Sorry, this probably isn't the best screen to show this on, just because it's a shorter screen. But if I were to change the expression or the functions in here, I would see it update immediately straight away. So then what you can do is you can go ahead and copy your expression that you have created in Canvas app, and then you can copy and paste. Because the other disadvantage of parents cards at the moment is that if you want to expand the formula bar, you can't drag and drop. You have to click on this button to expand it. So there's just a little bit of cons at the moment. So I'm going to replace this with my variable. And that's the expression. Now, for the second button, it's pretty much the same. wise. Once again, I'll change the type to open URL, and I'll head back to my slides just to explain it. So previously the page type was for the entity record, yeah. And this time, if you want to pull up a view in a model-driven app, the page type definition needs to be entity list. You're still referencing the challenge table. So again, you have to provide the logical name. And then the only difference is the end of the URL, where this time we need to provide the ID of the view, which again will be stored in an environment variable. And then we also have to provide the view type. 1039 means a system view. There is another numerical value, and that means a personal view. So whenever you create dynamic URLs, if you want to direct a user to a system view, that view type value needs to be this. Otherwise, if you want to direct the user to their own personal view, then the view type value would be a different number, which is available in the Learn documentation. So I'll head back to the Power Apps card, head back to my Canvas app, and I'll just go ahead and copy my expression. So this is it here. So again, I'm calling my environment variables to build that URL. So there we go. And again, the yellow squiggly lines is just warning you about the delegation limits of Power Apps cards. Okay, so that's pretty much our card built. Now, one of the things that I absolutely love about Power Apps cards over adaptive cards is you can also see the JSON. So if you are a pro code and you are designing your Power Apps card in the Power Apps card designer, you can still edit it. And the other cool thing is you can also see what your card is going to look like by using the play button. Remember when I talked about earlier about adaptive cards? Until you do the end-to-end testing, you're not really going to be able to see what it looks like. So in terms of iterative testing, Power Apps card is a better end user experience for that reason. So in terms of the challenge name, so these are all the variables, and the reason why it's showing up as red is because we had ticked that checkbox that says customization is required. And if you see here in terms of the description that you're seeing, this is what we typed in the additional details when we were creating the variables. So now if I just borrow one from a challenge that already exists, just go ahead and copy the details. So this is how you can also test your card live. And I'll copy the description. Let's say it's Adele Vance. If you know, you know. And then in terms of the GUID, I'm also going to copy the GUID value and paste it in there, click done, and then we can see our card live. So now if I click on view challenge, fingers crossed that this does load. Oh no, it doesn't. Do this one. So this one will load the active challenges, and that way I can see that button URL is working. So now because that one has failed, let's go back and see whether we can take a look at what's causing it to fall over. Okay, so I already know what the problem is. Missing a bracket.
I think at the end, the ID is equal the challenge description.
Yeah, thank you. So this should be good. Thanks. Okay, so now let's play that again. And now if I click on view challenge, okay, now it's showing me an invalid URL. Good, right? Okay. should work. Let me go to my blog post. So by the way, I do have this in a blog as well as a video. So if you do want to learn or revert back to this afterwards, you can. Try that again. Okay. I think I just didn't hit the save button. So it actually didn't save that I updated the variable at the end to var challenge good. Thank you. Thank you. So now that's working. Okay. So now that we've tested it, which is pretty cool because again, in adaptive cards, you couldn't really do that straight away. We can now go ahead and create the cloud flow. So I'll go to the maker portal and we're going to go ahead and create a new cloud flow. So disclaimer, when I was testing and editing in the new cloud flow designer, it didn't work. So I had to use a classic designer and I've notified the PM about it. So they're going to look into it. Basically, when you use the new cloud flow designer and when you're sending to a Teams channel, the values aren't saved. It keeps resetting itself, but in the classic flow designer, it works fine. So let's go ahead and create the cloud flow. So I'm going to go to automation. I'll select cloud flow. I'll select automated. And I'll enter a name. I'll select the trigger. So it'll be when a row is added or modified. This one, and I'll click create. And the change type will be added. Now, best practice, rename your triggers and actions, but I won't do that today. So then I'll select the challenges and the scope. And as Lynn pointed out earlier in his session, also make sure you fill in your select columns and you filter rows to try and improve the performance of your cloud flows. So now this trigger will be functioning whenever a new challenge row is added in the challenge table. And then we're going to add an action where we're going to retrieve the user table. Now, the reason why we're going to do this is so that we can grab the full name. Challenge ID from the trigger. And I'll just reduce this to full name. I'm going to save this first. Then the next action that I'm going to add is the create card instance from the new cards for Power Apps connector. And now I can simply select the card. And once it loads, it's going to show me the variables. So again, the challenge name is that title that we entered, as well as the description of the variable. So that's why it's important that you give it a descriptive meaning so that whoever the maker is that is calling that card will know what these input values need to be. And as I mentioned earlier, we can now populate these input values using the dynamic content picker. So now if I type in name, I'll be able to grab the name of the challenge from the trigger. Same with the description. And then with the owner, it'll be the full name of the owner record that is linked to that challenge table. And then for my invisible variable, it's just going to be that challenge good. See how easy that was compared to adaptive cards? So previously you would have to copy and paste your JSON and then find out, which properties you needed to populate using the dynamic content picker. But here, by using variables, it's a breeze. So then the final step is simply posting the card to a Teams channel. Oh, there's that action. And the option that I want to select is post as pair apps. And then I'm going to select a channel. And then I'll be prompted to select the team. I'll use design and then the channel of that team. So I'll just select general. And then in here is where I can select the output of the create card instance action and click save. So that's it. That's a Cloudflow done in, I don't know how long that took, about five minutes or so. And so now we can go ahead and test it. So let me open up the Cloudflow that we can see whether it has been triggered or not. Okay, I'll go back to my model-driven app. So again, this is an innovation challenge app. I'm going to select the new button. This will then present the user with the new form to fill in. So I'll call this version. I'm going to use Cupcake Ipsum. If you heard of lorem ipsum, this is another version where it gives you lorem ipsum in terms of desserts. I think it's fun. I like using it for testing. So I'm going to copy and paste it in there. So at minimum, that's all we need to pull, enter, in the new challenge. I'll go ahead and save this, and then this should trigger the Cloudflow. Oh, it failed. Why did it fail?
In the variable selected this challenge, it should be like the owner of that or like that particular field. The ID that is being passed to the challenge ID, that stuff.
Oh, okay. Like owner value?
No, it's a challenge ID, but in the user table, you need to set the user ID there.
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you. I'm getting a lot of help from the audience today. Try that again. Cool. So going back, I'll create a new one. But at least we know that the Cloudflow did trigger, so that's good. Now if I go back to the run history, oh, I save. I didn't save, hang on. Let me create a third one. Otherwise, I will show you one that did work. It's better. Cool. All right. So now let's head to Microsoft Teams. And I posted to the general channel in the design team. So this is what the card will look like. Now, by default, if it doesn't load automatically, it will show the title of the card, the name of the card. But if you click on the load card button, it'll then load the card in your channel. So as you can see, the variables have been populated using the dynamic content that we selected in the Cloudflow. Now, when I click on the button, View Challenge, it will then direct the user to that record in the model-driven app. And then likewise with the View Active Challenges button, it'll direct them to that system view in the model-driven app. And so if you're deploying this in your target environment, you just need to remember to update the environment variables to the target environment details. So going back to my slides, I just have a few more slides to cover and then we'll call it a day. So in terms of the additional details you need to know, there is a couple of new security roles. So as I mentioned, cards are now stored as rows in Dataverse within a new table called card. It can control who can create, read, and update cards. But I put a note in here because regardless of a user security role, any user can retrieve and use cards sent through Teams. So in terms of the two security roles that exist today, we first have the cards basic role. So this allows the user to view, create, and use cards in the environment. And then for the cards role, this is one that's used behind the scenes by the service. And if you remove the permissions for this one, it means that the cards, perhaps cards will not work in your environment. So just be aware of that. Cards is now supported in terms of the connector in DLP. So if you want to put some governance around Paris cards, that's now supported as part of the GA release. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to relearn whatever I've showed you today, or if you want to go and experiment in your own environment, this is available on my YouTube channel to follow step by step. And I go through it with you. And yeah, just want to say a big thanks to our sponsors, and thank you for having me today as presenter. And I hope you learned something new. If you have questions, we can talk about it over lunch. Thank you.